Have you ever walked into a room, said almost nothing, and still felt the temperature shift? Not because you demanded attention, but because someone started watching you carefully, not with admiration, with irritation. That irritation has a name, and it's not about you. You're at a gathering. People are performing, subtle status checks, louder laughter than necessary, stories slightly exaggerated. You're listening, observing. You contribute once, maybe twice, and later that night, someone can't stop thinking about you, not because you were frashy, because you were unmoved. That unsettles people more than dominance ever could. Here's the psychological truth. Envy doesn't activate when someone has something we don't want. It activates when someone embodies something we abandoned. Depth, integrity, self-containment. When an INFJ moves through a room without chasing approval, it exposes how much approval others are chasing. When you refuse to compete, you reveal the competition. When you don't perform, you expose the performance. And mirrors are uncomfortable. But here's where it gets darker. The envy isn't always conscious, and unconscious envy rarely stays quiet. Most conversations are transactional, signal safety, exchange pleasantries, move on. When you respond to a casual question with something layered, thoughtful, slightly existential, the energy shifts. People feel seen deeper than they intended to be seen, and depth forces a choice: engage honestly or retreat into surface. Many retreat, and then resent you for making them aware of it. There's a difference between sympathy and attunement. When you attune to someone, they feel transparent. You notice the micro-hesitation before they answer. You sense the incongruence between their words and tone. You don't call it out aggressively, you just register it, and they feel that. Being perceived that clearly can feel intimate or invasive, especially for someone hiding from themselves. But let's disrupt the pedestal narrative for a second. This isn't about INFJs being superior, it's about what happens when someone refuses to fragment themselves to fit in, and that refusal has a cost. When you're not easily manipulated by flattery, when guilt doesn't override your boundaries, when popularity doesn't dictate your behavior, it destabilizes people who rely on those tools. Because influence depends on leverage, and if you don't need validation, you can't be steered by it. That feels threatening, not because you're powerful, but because you're not controllable. Many people are busy, few are aligned. When you move with quiet, long-term intention, declining things that look impressive but feel misaligned, others feel their own drift more sharply. You don't preach purpose, you live it, and lived conviction highlights borrowed ambition. That gap creates envy. Here's something subtle. Stillness reads as confidence. When you don't rush to fill silence, when you speak slowly and precisely, when you don't over-explain, people project authority onto you, even if you never asked for it. And those who build identity through noise feel displaced by your calm. This is the one people rarely admit. If you calmly hold a value without theatrics, without aggression, without backing down under subtle pressure, you become a walking reminder of their compromises, and no one enjoys being reminded of where they bent. So instead of confronting their own flexibility, they label you rigid, cold, holier than thou. Projection protects the ego. Most people oscillate. Emotion overrides logic. Logic suppresses emotion. But when you integrate both, when you can empathize deeply and think clearly at the same time, it feels rare. Because it is. And integration exposes internal fragmentation in others, which, again, feels uncomfortable. Remember the irritation in the room, the temperature shift? It wasn't about your mystery, it was about reflection.
You reflected depth to someone who prefers distraction, integrity to someone negotiating their values, self-containment to someone dependent on applause. That doesn't make you better, it makes you confronting. But here's what INFJs rarely talk about. Being the mirror is lonely. You'll be admired quietly, resented subtly, misread often, and expected to carry a presence you never consciously crafted. So the real question isn't why people envy you, it's whether you're strong enough to stop shrinking so they don't. Because once you understand how projection works, you'll start noticing something else, the moments when you're the one projecting. And that's where the real growth begins.